Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today we're going to compare two countries that I think are kind of similar on the surface, but quite different, I would say, in terms of the people who end up ultimately going there. And these are Malta and Cyprus. So both Mediterranean islands, both part of the EU, and so both have kind of favorable taxes, both clearly have a Mediterranean climate. So let's talk a little bit about what these places are like. We're going to discuss a little bit about the taxes. We're going to talk about the climate. We're going to talk about lifestyle there. We're going to talk about language. We're going to talk about other things you might want to know if you're considering moving to either of these places. At the end, I'll let you know what it is that I find clients in general over time tend to prefer. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. Thank you for your support, appreciate it. If this is your first time here, I'm Michael from Offshore Citizen. We are some of the foremost international tax and relocation specialists in the world. And so we help you to set yourself up to optimize your taxes by relocating, by setting up international structures, by doing international banking, potentially going and getting residencies, citizenships, asset protection, all that kind of thing. If you're interested in any of that, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so for those who have not been, so Cyprus is quite far down in the Mediterranean, kind of near Turkey. They are partially Turkish, partially Greek, essentially. And there's kind of been some long-term dispute there, etc. I've made some videos from there. I actually got married in Cyprus. And then Malta is sort of closer over by Italy, and so sort of more central in terms of the Mediterranean. Cyprus is the larger of the islands between them. Actually, my wife has some family from Malta, so we've been to both places and spent a bit of time in each. And I've made some videos from Malta too, so if you want to go and check those out, you definitely can. So first things first, I think one of the quickest comparisons that some people might be interested in is Malta is basically kind of former English colony, like very English. So from a language standpoint, if you're focusing on English as your language, which many people watching this might be, you'll find better English there. Now, the truth is English is pretty good in Cyprus, and the truth is English isn't the only language in the world. So Greek is kind of the larger portion that people would tend to go. Larnaca, Paphos, Limassol, these are all Greek parts of the island. And so often people would consider that it's sort of the official language of Cyprus. And so you'll find the laws are written in Greek, etc., which can have its pros and cons. I would say that climate, quite similar. I mean, you can debate depending on what you like, but very similar climates, lots of sunshine, lots of warm weather. Certainly in the winters, it gets a little bit cooler, but we're talking about, in January, be kind of high teens or something like that. Like it never gets really cold in these places. Like I said, there's a lot of sunshine. Tends to be good. I find that, say, the water to go swimming and stuff, even as late as November, in some places like Cyprus, is quite nice. And so if you're interested, there's that. Clearly it gets hot in the summer. That's pros and cons for different people. You can kind of go out according to your preferences. Malta is sort of more like, it feels more crowded. It's a smaller island, but it's also kind of built up in such a way that narrow streets, just little space. So for people who like more open space, there's a lot more of that in Cyprus. And so that's something to consider. It also probably means that it's more helpful to have a vehicle to get around in Cyprus. Certainly I've found being in Cyprus much better to have a vehicle. Obviously there's ways around in all kinds of places, but preference would be that. Whereas certainly, can be helpful in Malta as well, depending on where you're going, what you're doing, etc. But that being said, it is arguably easier to get around in Malta without a vehicle. Next things, cost, I would say probably pretty similar. These are, they're not super expensive places, but they're not super cheap places either. So, it's not like Bulgaria, and it's not like, I don't know, Paris or London or something like that. So somewhere in the middle. The GDP per capita and economic opportunities, reasonable, I would say, in both. There tends to be a fairly entrepreneurial culture in Cyprus. That was one of the things that I noticed. They have historically both sort of gone for some of the similar niches. They've got sort of offshore businesses servicing the gambling industry. It's kind of been a big focus for both of them. They both had citizenship by investment programs, or really citizenship by donation, although it was actually a quasi-true investment in the case of Cyprus for quite a while. That program no longer exists. The one in Malta still does exist. It's quite attractive in that regard, as it's the best passport that you can kind of directly purchase. So that's kind of cool. If you're looking at residency options, there's residency options in both, some pretty attractive ones in both cases. I've done some videos on those, so you can go and check them out individually. One thing I would say is that the process of going through residency in Malta tends to be much slower than in Cyprus. So Malta is just quite bureaucratic. A similar thing if you're talking about setting up companies. On the surface, you might think, oh, Malta's kind of an interesting place to set up a company. Malta is typically a terrible place to set up a company. It tends to be quite expensive to do so, but also very bureaucratic, very slow, much faster, much easier, cheaper to do so in Cyprus. So that's a factor that one might consider. Then we have, if we start looking at something like the options in terms of like sort of the community that you have there. I would say in general, there's a stronger entrepreneurial community in Cyprus than there is in Malta. Just tendency that, well, I'll kind of leave that for a minute, we'll come back to it, but bottom line is, if you're looking to kind of connect with other entrepreneurial people, I generally find Cyprus is better in that regard. Now, Cyprus is going to be more sort of diverse in terms of the backgrounds of the people who tend to be there for whatever reason. I find that it's just sort of a little bit more blended than I generally find in Malta. Although to be fair, Malta is also kind of increasingly attracted people from all over as well. So you can play it both directions. Convenience-wise, much better to be in Malta. So Cyprus is actually a little far. There are a bunch of airports in Cyprus, interestingly, given it's such a small place, but there's multiple airports there. However, because of the fact that it's way down in sort of the bottom corner of the Mediterranean, accessing the rest of Europe is much less attractive. If you're in Malta, on the other hand, I mean, you can take ferries over to Italy. That's super cool. You're in a situation where it's much, much closer to take flights to other parts. And so I think that's certainly a greater attraction for a lot of people. If you're thinking about staying there long term and getting citizenship, so Malta basically doesn't naturalize people. In theory, okay, you can over a very long period of time naturalize there. They don't like to give out their citizenship by naturalization, mainly because they sell their citizenship. Cyprus kind of was like this. They have more recently improved that quite a bit. And I've done a video previously on some of the, depending on what category you're in, they've greatly reduced the amount of time. It actually, in theory, can be pretty much the fastest place to get citizenship by naturalization in the EU, although it does require a fairly significant time commitment actually in the country while you're there. So that's sort of another part of it. If I was to kind of compare these places overall, one of the things I think is super interesting is I've, over the years, seen people move to both countries. Quite a few people. There's a lot of reasons why, on paper, they can each be attractive. They both have a decent network of tax treaties. The passport of Malta is better than the passport of Cyprus if you were to get them. Cyprus was traditionally not Schengen, although that's changing, and Malta was, and so that was sort of an advantage that some people had. They would kind of spend part of the year in Malta, but then spend a bunch of the rest of the year in some other parts of the Schengen, so that was sort of attractive. In spite of all of this, what I have observed is that, for sure, people tend to prefer living in Cyprus over Malta. Now, that's really largely about how long they stay there, okay? Generally speaking, as somebody who's moving there, the taxes are pretty similar. So you have the non-dom in Cyprus, which is quite attractive for new residents. Basically, it means that you shouldn't end up paying more than 12.5% tax, and you could be much lower than that. Malta has this non-dom program as well. Their non-dom program is quasi-remittance-based, meaning that certain types of income, even if they're remitted, if it's foreign, then you don't pay tax on it. Other income, if it's foreign and you don't remit it, it's not taxable. Banking is utterly impossible in Malta directly. It's terrible, really, really bad. Cyprus has more banking options, but their banks basically, well, they had a lot of problems and people ended up losing money, et cetera, back in 2013. And so we generally don't recommend banking there for any large amount of money. So anyway, yeah, that is, in spite of all these things, I find that many people will go to Malta, but very, very few people actually stay living in Malta. It's interesting to try and corner down like what it is about that because, for example, the school system is much better in Malta, I would argue, than it is in Cyprus. But I think it's just fundamentally, for whatever reason, people feel a little bit less comfortable living there. People seem to go to Cyprus with their eyes open about what it's like. I think they tend to enjoy the space and what kind of comes with that. And it's kind of developed a community around it. And so a lot of people maybe wouldn't think of Cyprus, and maybe you should. They have a tax residency option where you can be there 60 days a year, maintain a home all year round, and not be any other country for more than 6 months. and meet the tax resident standards, that's pretty attractive. So anyway, if that is of interest to you, please reach out to us. If you're interested in other country comparisons, we've got a bunch of them on the channel here. So check those out, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.